A millionaire awaits a call that could save his struggling company. When he steps out for a meeting, his cleaner's daughter answers the phone and says, "Never call my boss again." When he returns and hears this, he decides to listen to the rest of the conversation and is left in total shock by what he discovers. The Tuesday morning sun sliced mercilessly through the glass walls of Arthur's office, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, suspended reminder of his failures. From the height of his concrete and steel empire, the city sprawled out like a grid of opportunities that, for him, had become a labyrinth of dead ends. The aroma of artisanal coffee, normally a balm for his entrepreneurial soul, now mingled with a metallic tang of anxiety that seemed to emanate from his own pores. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the corner was a hammer striking the nail of his financial coffin. He was on the verge of collapse, and the name of his only hope was Victor Sterling, an international investor whose reputation preceded him, whispered to have the Midas touch, one meeting, one signature, and everything would be saved. A no, and everything he had built would crumble like a house of cards. He adjusted his tie for the 10th time, the silk knot feeling like it was tightening around his throat. His reflection in the glass showed a man he barely recognized. Shoulders stooped under the weight of invisible debts, eyes etched with sleepless nights. Where was that audacious young man who believed he could conquer the world? He had become naive, trusting partners who saw his passion as a weakness to be exploited. Now, that naivete had left him vulnerable, an easy prey for any predator who smelled his desperation. Victor, however, seemed different. His emails were direct, his promises grand. He was a lifeline in an ocean of failure. The office door opened smoothly, and his assistant announced the visitor's early arrival. Victor Sterling strode in as if he owned the place, with a smile that seemed carved from marble and a suit that likely cost more than Arthur's car. In his hands, he carried a bottle of red wine, the label so old and prestigious that Arthur felt a wave of relief. It was a gesture of confidence, a sign that the deal was already sealed in his mind. "To celebrate our prosperous future in advance, my dear Arthur," Victor said, his voice a smooth, enveloping baritone that soothed the host's frayed nerves. Meanwhile, just outside the glass of the conference room, 8-year-old Lena was sitting on the hallway floor, drawing in a well-worn sketchbook. Her mother, Maria, the cleaner, was polishing the brass doorknobs with reverent care, reminding her daughter to stay quiet. Lena nodded, but her curious eyes were fixed on the two men. She liked Mr. Arthur. He always gave her a kind smile and sometimes a piece of chocolate he kept in his drawer. The other man, the visitor, was different. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Arthur, buoyed by Victor's confidence, poured the wine into 2 crystal glasses, the dark liquid swirling like liquid velvet. He turned for a moment to grab a letter opener from his desk, using it to gesture toward a point on the horizon. It was a second, no more. But in that second, Lena's eyes, sharp as a kitten's, saw something that made her hold her breath. The elegant man, with a quick, discreet motion, took a small envelope from his inner jacket pocket and tipped a fine white powder into Arthur's glass. The gesture was so fluid, so practiced, that a distracted adult would never have noticed. But Lena saw. She saw the false smile reappear on the man's face as he pocketed the envelope. "A toast," Victor said, raising his glass, "to the success that awaits us." Arthur, beaming, took his own, the cool crystal against his trembling fingers. He felt the euphoria of the impending rescue, the sweet taste of victory after a long battle. He raised the glass toward Victor, his lips parting to take the first sip of salvation. At that exact moment, the conference room door flew open with a bang. Lena burst in, tripping over her own feet with a theatrical clumsiness. She collided with Arthur, and the glass flew from his hand, the red wine staining Victor's expensive suit in a crimson explosion. Amid the chaos, the girl clung to Arthur's arm, her face pale with dread, and whispered desperately into his ear, her voice a thread of sound audible only to him. "Sir, I'm sorry about the accident. I saw him put something in your glass." Time seemed to freeze in that chaotic instant. The silence was broken by the sound of wine dripping onto the Persian rug and the frightened gasp of Maria, who rushed into the room, her eyes wide with terror. "Lena! Oh, my God! Please forgive me, Mr. Arthur, Mr. Sterling. She's just a child. Sometimes she's so clumsy. I'm so sorry." She grabbed her daughter's arm, ready to scold her, but stopped when she saw the deathly pallor on the girl's face and the way she clung to Arthur, trembling. Lena's whisper still echoed in Arthur's mind, a seed of ice planted in the warmth of his euphoria. "I saw him put something in your glass. It was absurd, a child's fantasy. Victor Sterling was a tycoon, a savior, not a comic book villain." Victor, for his part, wore an expression of controlled disbelief, looking down at the dark stain spreading across his white linen suit. There was a glacial glint in his eyes that contradicted the forced smile he tried to maintain. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice a little tighter than before. "It happens. Kids will be kids." But his eyes weren't on the stain. They were on Lena, a quick, calculating glance that sent a shiver down Arthur's spine. He felt the desperate grip of the girl's small fingers on his arm. She wasn't lying. Her fear was real, palpable. "Maria, please take Lena to get a glass of water," Arthur said, his voice surprisingly calm. He needed to think, needed a moment away from those piercing eyes. "It's all right. It was an accident." He gave Maria's shoulder a reassuring pat, relieved and confused. She guided her daughter out of the room, casting one last apologetic look over her shoulder. Alone with Victor, the atmosphere in the room suddenly grew heavy, charged with a tension that hadn't been there before. Arthur forced a laugh. "My sincerest apologies, Victor. Let me have someone take care of that. The dry cleaning, of course, is on me." "Nonsense," Victor replied, pulling a silk handkerchief from his pocket and dabbing at the stain. A futile gesture that only spread it further. "Let's focus on what's important." He sat down, but his relaxed posture had vanished. He watched Arthur's every move. Arthur's heart was hammering. He had to see. He had to know. Under the pretext of cleaning the mess, he bent down to pick up the shards of the broken glass. But his eyes went to his own glass, which had landed intact on the rug, the remaining wine forming a small, dark pool. He picked it up, his hand trembling slightly. "What a waste of such a fine vintage," he murmured, trying to keep his tone light. He angled the glass against the light from the window, as if admiring the crystal. That's when he saw it. At the bottom, clinging to the glass by the wine's residual moisture, was a residue, tiny granules of a white powder that hadn't fully dissolved. It wasn't sugar, it wasn't sediment. It was something foreign, artificial, exactly as Lena had whispered. Arthur's blood ran cold. The room seemed to spin. Victor's voice, now coming from an infinite distance, pulled him back. "Arthur, are you all right? You've gone pale." Arthur raised his head slowly, the smile on his face now a brittle, fragile mask. He looked at the man sitting across from him, his supposed savior, and for the first time he saw past the expensive suit and smooth talk. He saw the coldness of a predator waiting patiently for its prey to walk into the trap. He was trapped in this room with the man who had just tried to kill him, and his only way out was to pretend nothing had happened. "I'm fine," he answered, his voice a hoarse thread, "just thinking about our bright future." The mask of the confident businessman was the only thing holding him together. Arthur placed the glass on the table with a hand that, to his immense relief, seemed steady. Every instinct screamed for him to run, to accuse the smiling monster before him, but reason, cold and sharp, warned him of the danger. He was unarmed, vulnerable, and Victor Sterling was a predator who clearly didn't leave loose ends. An accusation now would be his final sentence. He had to play the game, at least for a few more minutes. He forced a wider smile, hoping it would cover the panic in his eyes. "You know, Victor, this whole incident, it has left me a bit shaken. And look at your suit. I feel terribly guilty. I can't think about business with you in this state. It's a matter of respect." Victor raised an eyebrow, a subtle gesture that weighed Arthur's sincerity. "Arthur, please. It's just a suit. I have a closet full of them. What matters is the contract that will solidify our future." He gestured toward the papers in his briefcase, the bait that had almost worked so perfectly. Arthur shook his head, adopting the air of a mortified host. "No, I insist. It wouldn't be professional of me. My head isn't in the right place. My employee's daughter, the commotion. Please, let's reschedule for tomorrow. Same time. Allow me this small gesture to make up for the trouble. Today, drinks and lunch are on me, of course. But business, tomorrow, when we're both calmer." The excuse was flimsy, but it was all he had. He was banking on Victor's arrogance, on the belief that his prey was so desperate that one more day wouldn't make a difference. For a long moment, Victor just watched him, his gaze weighing every word. Arthur felt a drop of sweat trickle down his back. Finally, Victor stood, a condescending smile forming on his lips. "If you insist, Arthur, your hospitality is excessive, but I appreciate the gesture. Tomorrow, then." He extended his hand. Arthur shook it. Victor's skin was as cold and dry as a snake's. The walk to the elevator was the longest of Arthur's life. Every step was measured, every word exchanged a polished lie. "Until tomorrow, Arthur. Until tomorrow, Victor." The elevator doors closed, and Arthur's persona crumbled. He leaned against the hallway wall, his legs shaky, gasping as if he'd run a marathon. The relief was so intense, it nearly brought him to his knees. He survived. But the relief was immediately replaced by an overwhelming terror. Lena, Maria, the girl had seen, and from the look Victor had given her, he knew she had seen. They were no longer safe. He ran back to his office, locking the door behind him. With trembling hands, he took the contaminated glass, wrapping it carefully in several tissues from his desk drawer, treating it like a precious, deadly artifact. He placed it inside his briefcase, next to the contracts that now seemed like documents from a parallel world. His mind, usually a whirlwind of business strategies and market projections, was focused on a single, terrifying truth. An 8-year-old girl, with her pure intuition and instant courage, possessed better survival instincts than he. A businessman who prided himself on his ability to read people. The humiliation burned, but it was eclipsed by a gratitude so profound it left him breathless. He owed her his life, and now he had to protect hers. He picked up his phone, his finger hovering over 911, but he hesitated. Who would believe him? A millionaire on the brink of bankruptcy accusing his savior of attempted murder based on a child's whisper. They'd think he was crazy. He needed concrete proof, and he needed help from someone he could trust with his life. He dialed a number from his personal contacts, one he hadn't used in years. The voice on the other end answered on the second ring. "George, it's Arthur. Cancel everything you're doing. I need you. Now. And George, find Maria, the cleaner, and her daughter. Find out where they went and put your best people on them. Don't let them out of your sight for a second." George was the personification of calm in the midst of chaos. An ex-head of security Arthur had hired years ago after a threat from a bitter competitor. He now ran a small, discreet risk management firm. He arrived in under 20 minutes, entering through a service entrance without any fuss, his face as impassive as ever. He listened to Arthur's account without interruption, his grey eyes fixed on his former boss's pale face, absorbing every detail, every tremor in his voice. When Arthur finished, he held out his hand for the briefcase. "The glass," he said, not as a question, but as a command. Arthur handed it over, and George examined it with the precision of a forensics expert, his expression revealing nothing. "My men have already located Maria and the girl," George said, his voice low and reassuring. "They took a bus to their neighborhood in Queens. They're safe for now. I've had 2 agents follow them at a discreet distance." Arthur felt a small wave of relief. It was the first right decision he'd made all day. "What do we do, George?" "The police." "Not yet," George cut in. "You're right. It's your word against his. With the testimony of a scared child, we need more. What's in this glass is our priority. I know a private lab, reliable and fast. We'll have results in a few hours." He took a padded case from his briefcase and placed the glass carefully inside, sealing it. "In the meantime, you have a meeting tomorrow." Arthur shuddered. The thought of facing Victor again, of smiling and pretending, made his stomach churn. "I can't." "George, I can't do it." "You have to," George insisted, his tone unyielding. "You put him off today. If you cancel tomorrow, he'll know something's wrong. You'll become the primary target, and he'll find another way, perhaps less subtle. You need to go, act like the desperate businessman he expects you to be. Buy us time. Record the conversation. Try to get him to talk about the wine, about the accident." He looked Arthur in the eye. "But you've been a businessman your whole life, Arthur. Consider this, the most important negotiation of your life." Meanwhile, in a modest neighborhood in Queens, Maria was trying to calm her racing heart. She didn't understand what had happened. Lena was sitting on her bed, too quiet for a child her age. She clutched her sketchbook like a shield. "Lena, sweetie, what happened back there? Why did you do that?" Maria asked gently, sitting beside her. "Oh, you scared me so much." Lena looked up at her mother, her eyes large and serious. "That man, Mommy, he was a bad man. He put a powder in Mr. Arthur's drink. I saw him." Maria sighed. Lena always had such a vivid imagination. "Honey, maybe you were mistaken. Maybe it was just some sugar." "It wasn't sugar, Mommy. It was badness powder. His smile was fake." Maria hugged her daughter tightly. She was exhausted and frightened. The job at Mr. Arthur's office was the best thing that had happened to them in years. She feared Lena's accident could cost her that job. Life was hard enough already. She didn't notice the discreet sedan parked across the street, nor the 2 men inside whose eyes never strayed from the window of their small apartment. Arthur's protection had already enveloped them, an invisible shield against a danger Maria still believed was a product of her daughter's imagination. That night, sleep didn't come for Arthur. He replayed the scene in his mind, the quick flick of Victor's hand, the glint of the powder, the terror in Lena's eyes. Every detail now screamed danger. He had built his empire on trust, on the belief that a handshake meant something. He saw the best in people, a trait his mentors had called optimism, but which he now saw as a dangerous naivete. His greed, his desperation to save the company at any cost, had blinded him to the obvious signs. He had almost traded his life for a contract, and a child with the purity of someone who hadn't yet learned to lie to herself saw the truth he had refused to see. That thought was more bitter than any poison. He wasn't the victim of a con. He had willingly walked into the trap. George's call came just before dawn, pulling Arthur from a shallow, nightmare-filled sleep. "We have the results," George said, his voice devoid of emotion, which made it all the more chilling. "It's worse than we thought, Arthur. The substance is a rare compound, a fast-acting cardiotoxin. Very few labs in the world can even identify it. Within minutes, it would have caused a fatal cardiac arrest. The autopsy would have read massive heart attack, likely attributed to the stress of your financial troubles. It would have been the perfect crime." Arthur sat up in bed, the phone pressed to his ear, the dark room seeming to shrink around him. The reality of those words was a physical blow, stealing his breath. He hadn't just been nearly tricked, he had been nearly executed. The gratitude he felt for Lena morphed into a retrospective terror, a vertigo that made him grip the headboard. He had been one sip away from death. "George, what do I do?" he whispered, his voice that of a broken man. "You do exactly what we planned," George answered, his voice firm. You go to that meeting, you smile, you negotiate. I had a listening device planted in your pen this morning while you were sleeping. Every word will be recorded. My men will be downstairs in the coffee shop and monitoring the security cameras. You won't be alone. But Arthur, remember, he cannot know that you know your life, and now the lives of that little girl and her mother depend on your performance. The mention of Lena and Maria solidified something inside Arthur. Fear gave way to a cold rage and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. He was no longer fighting just for his company or his life. He was fighting for them. The meeting was a masterpiece of tension and deceit. Arthur played his part with a conviction that surprised even himself, channeling all his financial desperation into his performance. He talked about projections, about the future, about the partnership, narrowly avoiding Victor's gaze, which seemed more intense, more probing than the day before. About yesterday's incident, Arthur began, his heart hammering against his ribs. I hope the wine didn't permanently ruin your suit. It was a special vintage, a gift from an old friend. Would have been a shame. Victor smiled, a flicker of interest in his eyes. Not to worry, Arthur. The important thing is that you didn't get a chance to taste it. Perhaps it was fate, who knows? A wine that strong might not have agreed with you, considering your pressure. The word pressure hung in the air, laden with hidden meaning. It was a test, a probe. Arthur felt the device in his pocket, George's pen, and forced a laugh. You're right, my pressure has been through the roof lately. Maybe the little girl did me a favor after all. He watched Victor subtly relax, convinced his prey was still oblivious. They spent the next hour discussing contract clauses that meant nothing, an elaborate charade to maintain appearances. Arthur felt like an actor in a deadly play, where one wrong step could bring the final curtain down forever. Far from the luxury of the penthouse, Lena's life had also changed. She didn't go to school that day. Maria, still unnerved by the incident, decided to keep her home. The girl could feel her mother's fear, a palpable anxiety that hung in the small apartment. She tried to draw, but the images in her mind were of the man's fake smile and the white powder falling into the glass. She felt guilty for the trouble she had caused, but a part of her, a strong, instinctive part, knew she had done the right thing. As she sat by the window, she noticed something. The same dark sedan from the day before was parked across the street. It wasn't a car that belonged in their neighborhood. She watched the two men inside. They didn't talk, just stared toward her building. They didn't look like cops. There was something about them that made her uneasy. She didn't tell her mother, not wanting to scare her further. Instead, she took Maria's old phone, which she used for games, and hidden behind the curtain, she took a picture of the car, zooming in as much as the device allowed, capturing the license plate and the outline of the men inside. She didn't know why, she just felt it was important. The week dragged on like a slow-motion nightmare. Arthur, under George's guidance, continued the dangerous charade with Victor, inventing excuses to delay signing the contract. A last-minute audit, a problem with the lawyers, an unexpected bank holiday. Each lie left him more exhausted, the tension gnawing at his nerves. He felt like a tightrope walker over a volcano, where the slightest miscalculation would send him plunging into the lava. The recordings of their conversations were frustrating. Victor was a master of dissimulation, speaking in generalities and innuendos, never admitting anything explicitly. He was patient, confident that Arthur's impending ruin would force him to sign. George, meanwhile, worked in the shadows. His investigation into Victor Sterling turned up a ghost. The name was likely a pseudonym. There were no financial records, business histories, or digital footprints that could be tied to him, except for a series of shell companies in tax havens. He was a professional. "This is more than a simple con, Arthur," George said during one of their secret meetings at a diner. "This man is meticulous. He studied you. He knew your routine, your financial situation. Even the fact that the cleaning lady sometimes brings her daughter. He knew Tuesdays were the cleaning day for your office. Lena's presence wasn't a surprise to him. It was a calculated variable he thought he could control. The revelation hit Arthur like a punch. He wasn't just a target of opportunity, he was a project. Someone had been watching him for weeks, maybe months, analyzing his weaknesses, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Paranoia began to set in. He looked at his employees with suspicion, questioning every smile, every friendly word. Who else was involved? Who had betrayed him? The feeling of isolation was suffocating. His office, once his sanctuary of power, now felt like a glass cage. While Arthur wrestled with his inner demons, the danger to Lena and Maria became terrifyingly real. One evening, as they were returning from the grocery store, two burly men blocked their path in the dim hallway of their building. They didn't touch them, but their words were like razors. "Your daughter has a very active imagination," one of them said to Maria, his face hidden by the shadow of a baseball cap. "It would be a shame if that imagination got her into trouble. Curious children sometimes get hurt." They were gone as quickly as they appeared, leaving Maria trembling, clutching Lena's hand. She didn't tell Arthur, afraid of losing her job. But the threat made her realize Lena's story wasn't a fantasy. Fear paralyzed her. She started locking the doors and windows, looking over her shoulder with every step. Lena, however, reacted differently. The fear was there, but beneath it, a cold determination began to form. She remembered the photo she'd taken of the car, and something else. In that split second in Arthur's office, before the powder fell, she'd seen Victor take the small paper envelope from his pocket. She remembered the envelope. It was made of expensive, cream-colored paper, with a small, gold-embossed logo in the corner, a kind of stylized bird. She hadn't told anyone, not even her mother. It was a small detail, perhaps insignificant, but her child's mind, with its attention to the details adults ignore, had filed it away. She took out her sketchbook and, with stunning precision, drew the logo from memory, the image sharp in her mind. She didn't know what it meant, but she felt it was a piece of the puzzle, a key to understanding the bad man. The drawing was her own secret proof, a weapon she didn't even know she possessed. The turning point came from an unexpected source. On Friday morning, Arthur got a message from George. "Meet me at the usual spot. Urgent." The spot was the diner, far from the financial district. George was at a back booth, a laptop open in front of him. He wasted no time on pleasantries. "I cross-referenced the data. The lab identified the chemical origin of the compound. It's manufactured by a single pharmaceutical firm in Eastern Europe. Very exclusive, very controlled. At the same time, I ran the name Victor Sterling through international security databases. Nothing. But when I started looking for accidental fatalities of businessmen in financial situations similar to yours, I found a pattern." He turned the laptop to Arthur. On the screen were the photos of 5 men, all wealthy, successful, and all of whom had died in the last 2 years under mysterious circumstances. A massive heart attack during a golf game, a sudden seizure on a private yacht, a fatal allergic reaction at a 5-star restaurant. All cases were closed as deaths by natural causes. "Every one of them," George said, tapping the photos. "It was about to close a deal with a mysterious foreign investor to save their businesses. No one ever got a clear look at the investor. He used different names, different appearances, but the MO was always the same. He isn't just a con man, Arthur. He's a white-collar serial killer." Arthur felt the floor drop out from under him. This was bigger, darker than he could have ever imagined. He wasn't just a victim, he was next in line. But how? How does he do it without getting caught? Arthur stammered. "He's a ghost," George replied, "and he's extremely careful, but he made one mistake with you." Before Arthur could ask what it was, his phone rang. It was Maria, her voice choked with panic. "Mr. Arthur, I'm so sorry to call, but it's Lena. "She's gone. I went to pick her up from school and she wasn't there. The teacher said a man, an uncle she's never seen before, picked her up early." "Sir, they took my daughter." Arthur's world stopped. The diner, George's laptop, the international conspiracy, it all vanished, replaced by the sound of a mother's desperate sobs. Victor's mistake hadn't been the substance or the method. His mistake had been underestimating an 8-year-old witness, and now he was correcting that mistake. A cold, primal terror seized Arthur, a feeling he had never before experienced. It was the certainty that he had led the danger right to the door of the one person who had saved him. As George was already on the phone, activating all his contacts and putting his team on high alert, Arthur realized the terrible truth. The battle was no longer about his company or his life. It was about rescuing an innocent child who had been dragged into his world of greed and deceit. Meanwhile, in a moving van, Lena sat in silence, her heart pounding, but her face strangely calm. The uncle, who picked her up from school, had a smile that didn't reach his eyes, just like Mr. Sterling's. She knew she was in danger, but panic didn't overwhelm her. Instead, her mind focused on the details. She had slipped her sketchbook into her backpack before she was taken. Inside, it was the drawing of the golden bird logo and, more importantly, something she had added that morning. A careful notation of the license plate from the dark sedan that was always parked on her street, copied from the photo she'd taken. She didn't know if she could escape, but somehow she knew she had to protect that information. It was her only weapon. And when one of the men grabbed her backpack and tossed it into the back of the van, she saw something that made her blood run cold. In his hand was a small cream-colored paper envelope, identical to the one Victor had used. And in the corner, gleaming, was the same golden bird logo. Arthur's panic was a physical thing, an icy claw that clenched his chest and stole his breath. Maria's sobs on the phone were an echo of his own crushing guilt. He, with his arrogance and desperation, had lit the fire, and now an innocent child and her mother were being burned by it. "George, do something!" he cried, his voice raw with despair. Even as George was already speaking into his own phone, rattling off orders in a rapid, coded jargon. "I am," George said, his eyes never leaving Arthur's. "The license plate the girl photographed. Have Maria send me the picture. It's our best lead." Arthur relayed the message to the frantic mother, his mind spinning in an abyss of what-ifs. What if they hurt her? What if they were too late? The image of Lena, with her serious eyes and her sketchbook, haunted him. She wasn't just a witness. She was the embodiment of his conscience, the brave child he had failed to protect. The next few hours were pure agony. George turned Arthur's office into a makeshift command center, with city maps spread across the conference table and comms lines crackling with updates. Arthur was useless, pacing like a caged animal, haunted by the silence of his own phone. Every passing minute was torture. He looked at the empty chair where Victor Sterling had sat, the man who smiled while planning murder, and felt a hatred so pure and intense it frightened him. He had catastrophically underestimated his enemy. Victor wasn't just a criminal, he was a monster with no limits, one who had no problem using a child as a pawn in his deadly game. The guilt ate at Arthur from the inside out. He had put the price of his company above the safety of a family, and now the universe was collecting the debt. Meanwhile, Lena was in a dusty warehouse, the smell of mildew and oil filling the air. The men had left her in a small room, taking her backpack. They weren't cruel, but they were cold and impersonal. "What else did you see?" one of them asked, the same one who had picked her up from school. "Who else knows about the powder?" Lena shook her head, her eyes downcast, feigning a fear that, while real, was less than her cunning. She knew that silence was her only defense. As the men talked outside the door, believing she couldn't hear them, she huddled down, her ears straining. "She's not talking," one voice said. Sterling said not to hurt her, just to scare her and find out if she told the police. If we get nothing in an hour, the order is to drop her near a park and disappear. The information was a small flame of hope. They weren't going to permanently harm her, but it was the next part of the conversation that chilled her to the bone. The operation is compromised, the other man said. Sterling is furious. He said if we can't silence this situation, we'll have to accelerate the timeline. The judge is next on the list, and after him, the senator. The word list echoed in her mind. It wasn't just about Mr. Arthur. There were others. The license plate, the picture she had taken, was the key. George's team, using recognition software, tracked the vehicle to an abandoned industrial park. They moved with speed and precision. There was no confrontation. The men, alerted by a lookout, fled moments before the team arrived, leaving Lena behind, scared but unharmed, exactly as they had planned. The reunion in Arthur's office was a storm of indescribable emotions. Maria ran and embraced her daughter, sobbing with relief, while Arthur watched, his heart aching with a mix of gratitude and shame. He knelt in front of Lena. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice thick. Lena nodded, her large eyes fixed on his. She seemed older, as if the few hours of terror had stolen a piece of her childhood. "I heard them talking," she said, her voice low and steady, cutting through her mother's sobs. "They didn't just want to know what I saw. They talked about a list, and they said the next name after yours was a judge." Lena's words fell like stones into a silent pool, the ripples of their meaning spreading through the room and enveloping everyone. A judge. The conspiracy was deeper and more dangerous than any of them could have dreamed. George, who had maintained a steel-like composure throughout the rescue, now had a frown of concern on his brow. "Arthur, this changes everything," he said in a low voice, guiding him to a corner, while Maria continued to stroke her daughter's hair, murmuring words of comfort. "Targeting a businessman is one thing, aiming for a member of the judiciary. That means Sterling's organization has the audacity and possibly the resources to try and destabilize the system itself. We're dealing with something much bigger than murder for profit." The revelation was overwhelming. Arthur felt like he was sinking in quicksand. The more he struggled, the deeper the danger pulled him, and he had dragged Lena and Maria into the center of this vortex. The guilt was a physical weight on his shoulders. He looked at the girl, now sitting on the sofa, her head in her mother's lap. She looked so small, so fragile, yet her mind held information that could bring down a criminal empire. And that made her the most valuable and most vulnerable target of all. "They can't go back to their apartment," Arthur said, the decision forming with absolute clarity. "It's not safe. They're staying with me." George nodded. "I agree. I've prepared a secure apartment in one of your buildings, one that's not listed under your name. Maximum security. No one in or out without my authorization. It's the only way." Maria protested, frightened by the thought of abandoning her home, her life. But the look in Arthur's eyes and the firmness in George's voice convinced her. She saw the terrifying truth. Her old life had ended the moment her daughter stumbled into that conference room. The move was made under the cover of night. Arthur, Maria, and Lena, escorted by George's men, moved into a luxurious corporate apartment, an anonymous and secure haven. For the first time in days, Arthur felt he could breathe, even if the air was still thick with fear. In the following days, a strange routine took hold. Arthur, stripped of his role as a tycoon, found himself in a new one, protector. He spent hours with Lena, not questioning her, but simply talking. He discovered she was incredibly intelligent, with an observational skill that bordered on genius. She remembered every detail, not just of the incident, but of everything around her. It was during one of these conversations that she pulled the sketchbook from her new backpack. "I drew this," she said, showing him the page with the stylized golden bird. "It was on the bad man's envelope, and the men who took me had it, too." Arthur took the sketchbook, his heart beating faster. The drawing was crisp, precise. "George!" he called. George examined the drawing, and his eyes widened slightly, the first show of surprise Arthur had ever seen from him. "I know this symbol," George said slowly. "It's not a corporate logo. It's the crest of an old European secret society, known as the Order of the Phoenix. Legend says they specialized in silent transitions of power. Most historians consider them a myth." Arthur looked from the drawing to Lena's face, which was watching him with a calm curiosity. A myth. He was being hunted by a myth that had turned out to be terrifyingly real, and the only person who had managed to get visual proof of their existence was an 8-year-old girl with a pencil and a sketchbook. The irony was overwhelming. In that moment, he realized Lena's intelligence wasn't just sharp, it was the key to all of their survival. Life in the safe house was a bizarre mix of luxury and imprisonment. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of the city, but to Arthur, Maria, and Lena, it was just a reminder of a world from which they had been severed. Maria cooked elaborate meals in the state-of-the-art kitchen, an act of normalcy in a completely abnormal situation, her tense movements revealing the fear that never left her. Arthur, meanwhile, tried to fill the days. He bought Lena the best art supplies money could buy, sitting with her for hours as she drew, not fantasy worlds, but uncannily detailed renderings of what she remembered. Victor's face, the car's license plate, the Phoenix logo. In these moments, the barrier between the millionaire and the cleaner's daughter dissolved. He saw in her not a victim to be protected, but an ally, a partner with an extraordinary mind. He marveled at her resilience, at how she processed trauma through art and logic, while he, the adult, felt like he was falling apart. The hope that they could simply hide and wait out the storm was brutally shattered when George arrived in the middle of the second week. His face, normally a mask of professional calm, was grim. "I tried a back channel," he said, placing a thin file on the coffee table. "An old contact on the police force. A man I'd trust with my life. I asked him to quietly pull the file on one of the other victims, the businessman who had the heart attack on the golf course. He gave me what he could." George opened the file. "The official report is a sham. The crime scene photos are missing. The primary witness's statement was misplaced. And the toxicology report, the blood sample was accidentally contaminated at the police lab before a full analysis could be done." Arthur sank into the sofa, the news sucking what little air was left from his lungs. "They're on the inside," he whispered. "The order. They have people inside the police department." "Worse," George said. "My contact was transferred to a desk job the next day. A clear message. The official channels aren't just useless. They're a trap. Any information we give the police will likely go straight to Sterling and his people. We are completely on our own." The despair in the room was palpable. They were trapped, hunted by a ghost organization with tentacles that reached even into the law. George left, leaving the file on the table like a monument to their failure. Arthur flipped through it hopelessly, seeing only legal jargon and bureaucratic forms. He tossed it aside, feeling the weight of defeat. Later that afternoon, Lena, having finished her drawings, wandered over to the table. "What's that?" she asked, pointing to the file. "Just work papers, sweetie." "Boring stuff," Arthur said, despondent. But Lena picked up one of the pages, an addendum that appeared to be a copy of the victim's personal ledger. She frowned, tracing a finger down columns of numbers. "This is wrong," she said simply. "What is?" Maria asked, moving closer. "This game," Lena said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "See, here he uses letters for some numbers. A is 1, B is 2. But sometimes the number has a dot next to it. When it has a dot, you have to read the letter backward in the alphabet. A B with a dot becomes Z. It's a mirror code. I had a puzzle book like this." Arthur and Maria exchanged a skeptical glance, but Arthur leaned in, his heart starting to beat a little faster. He looked at the seemingly random notations next to certain expenses. Meeting WVS was written next to a cash withdrawal, and beside it, a string of letters and numbers that made no sense. "Try your code, Lena," Arthur said, his voice a whisper. With her help, they began to decipher the line, letter by letter, number by number. It wasn't a financial transaction, it was a note. When they were finished, they stared at the paper, their blood running cold. The deciphered message read, "Judge Albright, Federal Courthouse, Friday, 2 p.m., Charity Gala." The gala was in 2 days. For a long moment, no one in the room moved. The words Lena had deciphered hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Judge Albright, Charity Gala, Friday. They were the coordinates for an execution. Maria was the first to break the silence, pulling Lena away from the table as if the papers were on fire. "Enough," she said, her voice trembling with dread and protective fury. "This is not our problem. This is not our fight. Mr. Arthur, with all due respect, you promised us safety. We are not spies. We are regular people. My daughter cannot be in the middle of this." Her panic was an understandable force, the cry of a mother watching her child being dragged into the depths of a dangerous ocean. Arthur didn't reprimand her. He understood. He felt the same thing. An overwhelming urge to grab them both and flee to the most remote corner of the earth. But he looked at the message on the paper and at Lena's serious face, and he knew that running was no longer an option. The Order of the Phoenix was not the type to leave witnesses alive, especially one as dangerous as Lena. They would be hunted wherever they went. Their only chance of survival was to fight back. "Maria, I know you're scared. I am too," he said, his voice calm but filled with a new, dark determination. "But they know about us. They know what Lena saw. Disappearing will only make us easier targets. And now we know another life is at stake. We can't stand by and let it happen." He turned to the girl, who was watching the exchange with a maturity that broke his heart. He knelt before her, ignoring Maria for a moment, and took her small hands. "Lena, you are the bravest person I have ever met," he said. And the words were the purest truth he had ever spoken. "None of this is your fault. It's mine. But you, with your intelligence and your courage, have given us a chance to stop these bad people. I will never, ever ask you to do something that puts you in danger, but I need your help to understand. I need you to trust me to keep us safe." Lena looked at her mother, then back at Arthur. She said nothing, but she gave his hand a small squeeze. A gesture of trust that was worth more than 1,000 words. That simple gesture sealed their fate. They were no longer scared individuals in hiding. They were a unit, a family forged in the fire of danger. When George returned that night, he found a transformed atmosphere. The panic had been replaced by a tense resolve. He listened to the story of the code's discovery without surprise, just a grim nod, as if he'd expected the key to come from the most unlikely source. The Federal Courthouse Charity Gala is one of the most exclusive events in the city. Security is tight, but it's designed to stop intruders from getting in, not to monitor the guests already inside. He analyzed. Sterling, or whoever he is, will be on the inside, moving freely. "So what do we do?" Arthur asked. "We can't call the judge and tell him he's going to be attacked based on a puzzle deciphered by a child. They'd have us committed." "No," George said, his grey eyes glinting with the light of a desperate plan. "We don't warn him. We go to the gala. You, Arthur, are a frequent donor. Getting a last-minute invitation won't be a problem. You will be my eyes and ears inside. My team and I will be outside, monitoring communications, watching the entrances and exits. We will not intervene. We will not try to be heroes. Our only objective is to get one piece of irrefutable proof, a photo, a recording of Sterling approaching the judge, something that can't be lost or contaminated, something we can take to the one entity I believe is above their influence. The international press. The plan was insane, a roll of the dice with their lives, but it was the only plan they had. Arthur picked up the phone, his finger hovering over the number for his contact at the gala's organization. He looked at Lena, at Maria, and then at George. "And I'm making the call," he said, his voice steady, sealing the pact. They were about to walk into the lion's den, armed only with a designer suit, a little girl's intellect, and a desperate hope of making it out alive. The grand ballroom of the luxury hotel was a symphony of opulence and denial. The sound of a string quartet drifted over polite conversation and the clinking of crystal flutes. Men in tuxedos and women in silk gowns glided across the marble floor, smiling smiles that didn't reach their eyes, just like Victor's. Arthur felt like a ghost among them. He wore the same kind of suit, held the same glass of champagne, but he was an imposter. Every beat of his heart was a war drum in his ears. Through a tiny earpiece, George's calm voice was his only anchor to reality. "Any sign of him, Arthur?" "Not yet," Arthur whispered, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching for a face that haunted his nightmares. He located Judge Albright near the champagne fountain. He was a kind-faced, white-haired man, laughing at a joke told by a senator. He seemed untouchable, oblivious to the spider's web being woven around him. Arthur felt a knot in his stomach. The man had no idea his life was being traded like a stock on Wall Street. The responsibility weighed on Arthur with crushing force. If he failed, the man's blood would be on his hands. "I have eyes on the judge," he reported. "No sign of Sterling?" "Keep looking," George replied. "He won't make his move in the middle of the crowd. He'll wait for a moment of isolation. Stay close to the judge." Then he saw him. It wasn't the Victor Sterling he knew. The hair was darker, slicked back. There was a discreet mustache and thin-rimmed glasses that changed the structure of his face. But the eyes were the same. Cold, calculating, predatory. He was across the ballroom, chatting amiably with an elderly couple, looking perfectly at ease. He was a chameleon, a master of infiltration. "Target spotted," Arthur murmured, his body going rigid. "He's changed his appearance." "Understood. Is the pen camera ready?" George asked. "Ready," Arthur replied, the pen feeling as heavy as a gun in his pocket. Arthur watched, heart in his throat, as the man excused himself from the couple and made his way to the bar. He took not one, but 2 glasses of champagne from a tray. The scene was a horrifying replay, an echo of the day in his office. He knew what was coming next. With an unnerving calm, the false Victor moved through the crowd, his path converging inexorably with Judge Albright's. It was like watching a train crash in slow motion. Arthur began to move too, trying to get an angle for the shot, for the proof George needed. But the crowd was thick. People stopped him to say hello. Oblivious to his desperate mission, the moment arrived. The man intercepted the judge with a warm smile. "Judge Albright, such an honor. Allow me to offer you a drink." He held out the glass. The judge, flattered, smiled and accepted it. Arthur was only a few feet away, but a cluster of guests formed around the judge, blocking his view. He wasn't going to get the shot. Panic flooded him. "George, I don't have an angle," he hissed. "He's going to drink it." There was no time for proof. There was only time for prevention. In a split second, the image of Lena bursting into his conference room flashed in his mind. Her calculated chaos, her courage. He knew what he had to do. With a motion that was both clumsy and deliberate, Arthur lunged forward, tripping and colliding with a passing waiter carrying a full tray of glasses and hors d'oeuvres. The result was an explosion of glass and liquid. The tray went flying, glasses shattered, and a wave of champagne and canapes drenched Judge Albright and the man beside him. The fatal glass, undrunk, smashed to the floor, its contents mingling with the mess. Amid the chaos of apologies and gasps, Arthur got to his feet. His eyes met the assassin's. The man's apologetic smile was a masterpiece of deceit, but his eyes were chips of ice. In them, there was no surprise or anger at the accident. There was only recognition, cold, absolute, and murderous. He knew it hadn't been an accident. The look of recognition in the assassin's eyes lasted only a second, but to Arthur, it felt like an eternity. In that second, the rules of the game changed. The charade was over. The hunt was now on, out in the open. The man, with supernatural calm, took a step back, offering a handkerchief to the stunned judge and muttering apologies, his gentlemanly disguise perfectly intact. Then he turned, and without a hint of hurry, began moving toward the exit, melting into the crowd. He didn't look back, but Arthur felt his gaze like a brand on his back. "Get out of there now, Arthur." George's voice crackled in his ear, urgent. "Head for the east exit. My men are waiting. Don't stop to talk to anyone." Obeying like an automaton, Arthur apologized profusely to the judge and nearby guests, claiming a sudden dizzy spell, and moved away, his heart racing. He had failed. He had saved a life, yes, but at what cost? He had no proof, and now the Order of the Phoenix knew exactly who he was and what he knew. He was no longer a problem to be handled discreetly. He was a threat to be eliminated. Back at the safe house, the silence was heavier than any scream. Maria hugged him the moment he walked in, a gesture of pure relief at seeing him in one piece. George was already there, his face a granite mask. "They're going to come for us," Arthur said, his voice empty. "We've kicked the hornet's nest, and we have nothing to defend ourselves with. No video, no picture, nothing." The weight of defeat crushed the spirit in the room. They had risked everything and lost. "My mistake was thinking we could beat them at their own game, on their own turf," George said, his voice low and laced with a rare frustration. "They are professionals at making proof disappear. We needed something they didn't know we had." It was then that Lena, who had been sitting quietly on the sofa, stood up. She walked over to the table where the file on the first victim still lay. "Mr. George," she said, her voice clear and firm, "you said we needed something they didn't know we had." Everyone turned to her. She looked so small, but her eyes held an ancient wisdom. "When those men took me," she continued, "they had a metal box in the van. They were burning papers in it. They said it was the trash from the operation." Arthur felt his heart stop. "What did you see, honey?" he asked gently. "I saw a piece of paper fly out of the box before it could burn all the way. It landed near my foot," she said. "I stepped on it, and when they weren't looking, I picked it up and hid it." With deliberate slowness, Lena sat on the floor, took off one of her sneakers, and from a secret compartment she had fashioned herself in the insole, she pulled out a small, folded piece of paper, scorched at the edges. She handed it to George. With hands that trembled slightly, George unfolded the fragment. Arthur's jaw dropped. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a fragment of a bank statement from a numbered account in Zurich. On it, visible despite the burns, were two transfers. One, dated a week earlier, was to a shell company linked to Victor Sterling. The other, scheduled for the following Saturday, was to a name that made George hold his breath, a known financial intermediary, famous in intelligence circles for laundering money for crime syndicates and clandestine operations. And below the names was a handwritten note, partially burned but unmistakable. Next targets, Senator Hayes, CEO Chen. It was the list, it was the proof. The money trail, the names, the link the police couldn't lose. It was the weapon they needed. George looked up from the paper, and for the first time, Arthur saw a glint of savage victory in his eyes. He pulled a satellite phone from his briefcase. "I'm making a call," he said, "to the office of an investigative reporter in Geneva. A man who owes me his life. By sunrise, the whole world will know the name of the Order of the Phoenix." The fall of the Order of the Phoenix was not an explosion, but an implosion. The story, leaked by the Swiss reporter and published simultaneously by a dozen of the world's top newspapers, was an earthquake. The paper fragment, analyzed and authenticated by experts, was the cornerstone of a rotten house of cards. With global attention fixed on them, international law enforcement agencies had no choice but to act. The Zurich account was frozen, revealing a financial trail that snaked across continents, implicating powerful figures in governments and corporations. Victor Sterling, or whatever his real name was apprehended at an airport in Monaco, trying to board a private jet with a fake passport. The arrests followed in a cascade. The empire built on silent deaths crumbled under the weight of a small piece of paper saved by the courage of a little girl. 4 weeks after that life-saving wine spill, the morning sun streamed through the same glass walls of Arthur's office, but the light no longer seemed merciless. It was warm, promising. The aroma of coffee mingled with the smell of crayons and the soft sound of a child's laughter coming from the conference room. Arthur didn't save his company. In fact, he sold it, using part of the money to establish a compensation fund for the families of the Order's other victims. The other part, the larger part, he used for something far more important. He looked into the conference room. Maria was there, not in a cleaning uniform, but in a smart business suit, reviewing spreadsheets on a laptop. She was the new administrator of the fund, her meticulous attention to detail and innate empathy making her perfect for the job. And next to her, at a large drafting table installed where the conference table used to be, sat Lena. She was no longer drawing the faces of criminals. She was drawing skyscrapers, bridges, and cities of the future, her lines bold and full of imagination. Arthur had finalized the adoption the week before. They were, officially, a family. The transformation in his life had been total. He had learned the hard way that true wealth wasn't in risky deals or financial empires, but in the ability to recognize and protect those who first protect you. The arrogance that had nearly led to his death was replaced by a profound humility and a gratitude that filled him every day. He had discovered that real security didn't come from glass walls and bank accounts, but from family bonds built on mutual protection and courage. Lena looked up from her drawing and smiled at him. "Dad," she said, the word still new and wonderful on her lips. "Look, I designed a new security system for the building. It uses facial recognition to detect micro-expressions of deceit." Arthur smiled back, his heart swelling with a love so vast it almost hurt. The girl's sharp intuition, her ability to see what others missed, was no longer just a survival instinct. It was being nurtured, transformed into a gift. The office that had nearly been the scene of a perfect crime was now a symbol of protective vigilance and second chances. Arthur walked into the room and sat down beside his daughter. He picked up a colored pencil. Together, father and daughter, they began to color in the blueprints, planning not the next big deal, but ways to protect other vulnerable entrepreneurs, to teach people to see beyond appearances. The glass that was meant to hold his ruin had been spilled by small, brave hands, saving not just one life, but creating an unbreakable family. He looked at Lena, at her fierce concentration and her pure joy, and he knew with absolute certainty that while he had lost an empire, he had gained the entire world. True family, he now understood, is formed in the moments when you protect each other without asking for anything in return. And sometimes our greatest protection comes from the most unexpected sources, proving that love and courage are the most valuable assets anyone can ever possess.